Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. I have talked a whole lot about my yearly TBR shelf. So quickly, rapid fire. I have a yearly TBR shelf because I have so many books in my house. I have over 1,000 books in my house, and most of them are unread because I read books, and unless they're kind of a new favorite or something I'm going to reread, they just leave my house. I don't keep everything I've read sitting on my shelves. And I love amassing books and knew that was a priority when I got a house, that I wanted to have books everywhere. So that is the way things are in my house. But I do narrow that down into a small subset that I want as my yearly TBR. And over the past several years, I've kept that sort of static and taking up the same amount of space. And I only clear off on January 1st whatever I read from that shelf to allow myself room to fill up with more books for my New Year's TBR shelf. So 2025 was particularly bad for reading from that shelf. I'm totally fine with the stuff I read overall from my unread population in my house, but it was pretty terrible. So I have only a few books moving off the shelf and a few books moving on. So I thought I would run through and just do a very rapid fire recap of what has left the shelf and what is going on the shelf, rather than a full video running down what has changed on the shelf or what's on the new 2026 TBR. So let's run through my 2025 reads. The first book I read, which in fact, these are by size order, but this was the very first book that I read. It's The Reason I Jump by Naoko Higashida and translated and introduced by David Mitchell and K.A. Yoshida. This is a nonfiction book written by a teenager who is nonverbal autistic in Japan. And this is such a powerful little book. I really enjoyed it. And not only did I really enjoy it, a lot of people knew I would enjoy it. So I had picked this up from just a charity sale secondhand because it had been mentioned to me a whole lot. Someone then gifted me a second copy of this in paperback. And I also borrowed the audiobook from my library and listened to it as I was taking down Christmas ornaments on January 1st, 2025. So it's been a full year since I read this, and it has still so stuck with me. It's really, really powerful. The next one is a really delightful, wonderful book, and that's Tooth and Claw by Jo Walton, another author I've really meant to get to for a long time and have heard so many people rave about and recommend to me personally, and I loved it. This is sort of a historical period piece, fantasy of manners, where we're in very proper society, kind of Victorian, I think, but with dragons instead of human beings. And those dragons have all these really major social rules that exist in the period in real life, but they're dictated by dragon biology mostly, rather than human social norms. And I just love that. I absolutely adored this book. Next was The Book of the Dun Cow by Walter Wangerin Jr. This one is a little bit more mixed, unfortunately, because this is inspired off of a story in the Canterbury Tales, which I have not read. And I think probably this is better that I just read it for the content of the plot and didn't know all the references to the Canterbury Tales, so that later on I can come back after having read the Canterbury Tales, which I do want to read, and read it again for a more layered reading. So this was purely a surface read, and it's really a story of epic good versus evil, but on a barnyard. So our rooster Chanticleer is kind of the good character fighting to save his farmyard from dire circumstances. And there's definitely a lot there with religious themes that I got some of and I didn't get other aspects of because it is very directly referential to an original work that I haven't read. So I respected this, I think, more than I enjoyed it. The next one is A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. And this is kind of a classic, or modern classic of science fiction, where we're following an order of priests, and it references back to around the 1950s a lot. And this order really are coming out of something apocalyptic that happened surrounding nuclear technologies. And so there's that looming dread of nuclear technology over this whole thing, and the author really having that post-World War II and pre or during Cold War vibe is really, really strong with this. So it was interesting to have read this, and Buddy read it with Melinda of A Web of Stories, and get out so many of those themes out of this. And really this is kind of 3 books in one, or it's a book in 3 parts that are very distinctly separate in different time periods in this world. And it's so interesting to follow this order of priests through what is a civilization advancing after massive catastrophe, them going through grappling with their civilization, with their religion, with what's important to them in belief, and also seeing kind of the cycles of humanity, and that's a big theme of this. So I think this was, again, one I much more respected than entirely enjoyed. I like this one a lot more than Dun Cow, though. But I think we both, myself and Melinda, in Buttery reading it, decided we didn't really feel a need to continue on to the second volume in this series because of what we got out of the first, and also that we've kind of heard it goes even more off the rails in the second. So I think this was a really impactful read of its time. Next was Robin McKinley's Sunshine, and I had a great time with this. This was, I think, really enjoyable reading. It wasn't my new favorite thing, but I really had a great time with this. And it feels very contemporary, and it's vampire fiction, but it also has a sort of post-apocalyptic element as well, because there's been some sort of paranormal war has gone on here, or is continuing to go on here possibly. And we're following a main character who doesn't really fully know that she's magical, but of course she's finding out she is magical. And she's also a baker. And what was so strange is this has a lot of dark themes, and that's very present here, and you can see on the cover, but yet it feels very cozy and just very enjoyable. And for me, this was a real mashup that felt like Buffy the Vampire Slayer mixed with Gilmore Girls, because it's a really small town and very connected with so much support around her. I really enjoyed this, and this was my first time trying Robin McKinley. And I was not surprised because I've heard McKinley's name shoved at me so many times, but I was surprised how much I enjoyed it because it's so out of my wheelhouse, really. Next is nonfiction, and that's Idiot America by Charles P. Pierce. How Stupidity Became a Virtue in the Land of the Free. So this has been on my yearly TBR for ages, so I'm glad I finally got to it, and I have talked about this very recently, as this was the last thing I read from my TBR shelf before the end of the year, and I really did enjoy this. I went in thinking this is kind of a bombastic title, but there must be a reason why I bought it. And I was right, because I really thought this was a fantastic exploration of the undermining of expertise within the US that has happened over the last couple decades. And so this is a little bit dated, but it felt very timely in tackling that topic. And I felt like was not just purely haranguing us for being stupid. It was kind of going at all the approaches that have been taken to undermine expertise and how we can spot that, really, I think, and why it is so insidious, the ways that affects us in our day-to-day lives all over the place. So I thought this was really fantastic reading, and I obviously tabbed it up a lot. And then lastly, the largest book from the pile is The Devourers by Indra Das. And this is one that unfortunately was a little bit disappointing because I had such high hopes for it. This is a sort of personal story, a history of a couple of ancient werewolves or lycanthropes in India. And it's a reimagining of some werewolf mythos, definitely, that I like the idea of more than the execution, I think. I love the prose. I think that's what I like out of this author the most, is the writing style and how that's all delivered. And I would definitely read from this author again. But it was so dreamlike, and I just had a struggle grasping on to anything really with the characters or the plot to carry me through this. So it was enjoyable to read, I think, overall, mainly because the prose carried me through. But as I said, I definitely would read more from this author. So that's my pile from 2025 that are leaving. So again, that's the amount of size, the space on the shelf I have to fill up. And I picked a bunch of small stuff, in fact. I've got one really big one, chunky one, and then I picked a bunch of teeny tinies. So first, we have H.G. Wells' Tono Bungay. I read another unpopular Wells, and I think this is fairly unpopular. A lot of people haven't heard of this one. I do have his popular works, but I think I've read all of them. And this one sounds even more like I will enjoy it, like the other unpopular one, When the Sleeper Wakes, that I read in 2025. So this is about a medicine called Tono Bungay and has something to do with like mass producing it for profit and really like economic satire, I think. And that is absolutely my catnip. So I think this one will be really for me, and we all know I really enjoy H.G. Wells' writing. So I'm really looking forward to that one. Next is one that has been on monthly TBRs before, but never on the yearly TBR, and a classic I really want to get to, and that's Orlando by Virginia Woolf. I don't really need to say anything about this one, I'm sure, but as far as I know, this spans a couple hundred years. It's a tiny one, novella following this one character who is fluidly changing gender and reforming their identity over this long period of time, who I think is also inspired by Woolf's a partner, Vita Sackville West. Then we have a collection of essays by Umberto Eco, Serendipities, Language and Lunacy, a brilliant illumination of intellectual history. This is just a collection of essays, nonfiction, I believe, but it jumps through things like the I Ching and Marco Polo, Columbus' voyage to the New World, the Knights Templar, the Tower of Babel. So this is, again, teeny and has a lot to it, and I really enjoy Eco's short writing. I've never read any of his long fiction, but I have a different one. I have one of his large books also on the yearly TBR shelf that has been sitting there for a couple of years, so I need to get to that one too. Then I have a play, not very usual for me, but this is The School for Scandal. Teeny tiny little play. I think this is very witty and satirical about gossip and a very scandalous society. So I think this is going to be a fun, entertaining one. And then kind of on the scandal element, I have Love in a Cold Climate by Nancy Mitford. I've heard great things about this, especially from Erin of Erin Read a Book, Erin Read a Book, and really wanted to get to it. So I bought this copy as soon as I saw it. And I think this is like a rom-com of its time, maybe, with some sort of comedy of manners, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm really looking forward to getting to it. And I want to read more of the Mitfords for sure. Next, kind of in the vein of my interest in history, we have The Dragon Waiting by John M. Ford, who is sort of a classic sci-fi fantasy writer. And this one, I'm not sure where it fits in that. Probably within the fantasy, but also alternate history area, which is usually sci-fi. But I think it definitely has magic. It has some sort of magical individuals that are trying to influence things to make Richard become King Richard III in his time. And they're trying to assure that happens. So it sounds very interesting, and they came out with this really nice newer edition, the Tor Essentials line, because it is sort of an out of print, or was it out of print classic that it is so well regarded that I really, really want to get to. And then we have one you've already seen if you've seen my January TBR. This is Near 1,000 Tables, A History of Food. So it is a food history, and it's very like jumping through time. I really want to read this, definitely. And I also realized after putting it on my January TBR that Melinda of Web of Stories and Ben of Ben Reads Good both have prompts for January reading month on their sort of bingo to read food related books. And then February is also Foodie February. So I'm gonna, I think, try to straddle January and February with this one and read it, but it is a very high priority for me to get to from this yearly TBR and my January TBR. And then again, classics are really hitting with me right now. So I have Frankenstein. I picked up this really beautiful version of the 1918 text, and this is from Fall River Press. You can't maybe really tell, but obviously there's really beautiful art here that is made from woodcuts, but this part over here is actually velveted on it, on both the back and front. And it's soft and fuzzy. It's really lovely, but the art is so gorgeous. So there's a really nice big picture inside. Oh, our dogs are there. But yeah, I really want to get to reading this 1918 text. I think I've only read the newer version, but I'm not certain. So I need to get to that one. And I also want to watch the movie, which I haven't watched yet, the new Guillermo del Toro adaptation. And then lastly, my one big chunky book that I put on the shelf is Perdido Street Station by China Mieville. I am constantly assigning myself this book on TBRs, on my priority list, all kinds of things. So we're doing one more thing by putting it on my yearly TBR shelf, which is right in my face where I sit every day. So I will finally get to it. This one, I don't even know how to express what it is, because Mieville writes in the new weird genre, so it's weird fiction, it's kind of science fictional. This one is very urban fantasy, it's really in a city setting. I know there's like bug people, and it's very strange, and I think this one also has maybe like almost steampunky elements too, so it's gonna be very, very weird and bizarre. And I am so looking forward to it, because I know he is exactly my type of writer, and I'm constantly recommended his work. I just need to get into it. So those are the new additions for 2026. And I feel like that's a pretty great smattering of variety. I also have the entire remaining rest of the selections that are still on that shelf to get to. I really want to pick up more stuff from that shelf. I mentioned in one previous video when I was talking about my yearly TBR shelf why I was not wanting to turn it over significantly, even though I had read so little from it, is because every time I'm looking at that shelf, I'm like, it's so well curated. Everything on there is like really exciting that I want to read, and yet I'm just not turning to it. So I do want to prioritize turning to those books a lot more this year, and I'm definitely doing that, though I'm not setting a lot of structure around doing that. But we will see. We will see when we come to the end of 2026 how much I actually got to. So anyway, that's it for my TBR turnover, and thank you so very much for watching.